When we think about our companies and the companies that thrive on Fortune 500 lists or have the highest retention of their clients, customers, or their teams, these are often companies that focus one way or another on community building. They're the ones that focus on building better relationships with people at every turn and transforming interactions into opportunities. And this is what I've had the opportunity to research now around the world. I've had the privilege to interview and meet some of the most fascinating people, culture setters, and corporate leaders around the world and learn from them, learn different things that we can apply to our lives and our work every single day. I was reading a study just yesterday, and I thought this was an important thing to point out because there's this growing joy gap. In fact, today there's a recent study that was just done. About 500 employees for companies doing more than $2 billion in revenue annually were surveyed around the world in more than 36 countries. And what they learned in this survey is that globally, employees want to feel more joy at work. In fact, what we learned is that 90% of our employees have an expectation of feeling more joy at work. And any guesses in the chat as to how many reported actually feeling joy at work? So 90% are expecting it. Any guesses to how many reported actually experiencing feeling joy? 20, 15, Lisa, Jen, Amy, 20, not far off. Actually, a little bit higher than that, but you're pretty close. 37%. Only 37% of people actually reported feeling joy at work. This is what the gap looks like for visual people like me, right? It's a 53% gap. Huge opportunity for us to close that gap, because when people feel more joy at work, it means they're building better relationships. It means they feel a greater sense of purpose and belonging where they are. And this is just as important, by the way, for our clients and our customers, right? We want them to feel the same, sense of joy and connection with our brand and our company at every touch point. So what I've done, I've hand selected 3 countries that lend themselves to this idea of how we can all be stronger community builders, both at work and at home. And then I'm going to leave a whole bunch of time at the end for us to have a conversation, answer any questions you might have. But without further ado, I'm really excited to take you to one of my favorite countries in the world, and one of the favorite places I've ever had the opportunity to travel, and it's Vietnam. Type in the chat, feel free to type in the chat if you've been to Vietnam. Maybe you are part Vietnamese or you know someone from there, but it's a really, really special place. And it was a special day when I landed there. I actually landed in Ho Chi Minh City. Going in November, Stephen. I love that. Enjoy. Have a great trip. I have some suggestions for you. So I landed in Ho Chi Minh City on New Year's Eve. Really interesting time, Western New Year, to land just about anywhere in the world. So I landed, dropped my stuff where I was staying, and immediately walked over to the main square, which was already filled with thousands and thousands of people who were getting ready to celebrate the new year. So I'm navigating through this crowd of thousands of people. And if you've been to Vietnam, you know I'm not kidding, seemingly even more motorbikes. For some reason, there's like more motorbikes per capita, I think, in Vietnam than anywhere else on the planet. And so I find this spot where I can see the stage, just excited to see how the new year is going to be celebrated in this part of the world. And just as I'm settling into my place, perfect eye line for the stage, I start to feel this sense of deep loneliness. Suddenly it starts to set in that I'm further away from home than I've ever been. I don't know anyone here. I don't speak the language. I start to feel very isolated, even though I'm surrounded by thousands of people. And sometimes when you start to feel isolated, you become hyper aware of your surroundings. So I start to realize and hear everything happening around me. And I notice there's this small group of people, maybe about 6-7 feet over to my right. And I notice they're laughing and talking and have started looking at me and now pointing at me. And next thing I know, I feel a tap on my shoulder. And just as scenes from Taken start to play in my mind, I turn and I see this woman in this gorgeous red dress, and she is beaming at me. And this woman in this red dress asks me in simple broken English if I'm alone. And so, of course, I nod my head yes. And this woman in this red dress smiles at me and starts shaking her head no. And she literally grabs hold of my arm and pulls me into her group of friends. And just like that, in an instant, my entire night changed. We were laughing together, dancing together, eating some of the most interesting food I still could not identify to this day together, and having truly a remarkable time. Now, we spoke very little, given the language barrier, but that didn't stop us from all feeling connected, for all celebrating together. So let's pause. Let's rewind a moment. Let's suppose that I didn't take that stranger's hand, that I said, it's okay, no thank you, I'm just going to stay in my own little introverted bubble here. I would have still been in the same place. I would have still heard the same music, maybe even tried some of the same food. But I can tell you with absolute certainty, I would not have felt connected to the experience in the way that I was when I was celebrating with a group. You see, the moment that I took that stranger's hand, the moment that I said yes to celebrating with the group, it instantly became what I call a +1 experience. A +1 experience. And life is meant to be a +1 experience. Do you get what I mean by that? A +1 experience? I'll give some examples, right? So a +1 experience, it's the difference between watching an Oscar-worthy film on Netflix alone in your room versus lining up at the theater for the midnight premiere, maybe even dressed in costumes. Or the difference between reading your favorite novel versus being in a book club, even if it's a virtual book club. Or this is my favorite. I'm going to a concert tomorrow, so this is like top of mind. The difference between listening to your favorite artist on Spotify with like the best Bose noise canceling headphones versus being in the arena, listening to that artist perform live. Now, let's be honest for a second, right? We don't go to the arena for the sound quality, right? We don't. In fact, I just had the incredible honor of seeing Elton John, one of his farewell concerts just the other day. And I got to tell you, it was a remarkable experience. Audio quality, not so great. It was bouncing around in the Rogers Center, not my favorite venue for concerts, but I would have traded anything to be in that room. It was one of the most remarkable concerts I've ever been to because of this euphoric, magical, indescribable energy in that room. That's a +1 experience. And you don't need a +10,000, +20,000 experience. +1 multiplies everything. What happens when we're sharing an experience with someone else is that it amplifies the amount that we're connected to that moment. So that amplifies the memory, our memory recall of that moment. It amplifies our focus in that moment, and it increases things like creativity and vision, not to mention leadership. +1 experience, it's the foundation of engagement and retention and empowerment and joy at work, at home, in our everyday lives. Now, what I learned later in Vietnam in my research was fascinating. This was not an isolated incident. What I learned later in my research is that in Vietnam, they actually value collectivism as a country. So in many ways, it actually comes from a communism background, but they actually see individuals as secondary to groups. What this means is if that woman in the red dress hadn't noticed me and hadn't invited me to join her and her friends, chances are it would have taken a matter of moments for someone else in that square to welcome me to join them just as quickly. There was this culture of connection. You could see it. It was hard to see in the video before, but you know how we come together at conferences or social gatherings, and often, especially in Canada, much of the westernized world, we often form these tight circles, right, with our friends or colleagues to catch up. In Vietnam, in that square for New Year's, but everywhere else I traveled in the country, there were never any circles like that at any event I went to. There were always like these half circles, always a parting big enough for at least one or two people to join, as if with their physicality, they were saying a circle's never complete. There's always room for someone else to join our community. What would it look like at our events, in our offices, at our social gatherings, family gatherings, if a circle was never closed? If we were always keeping an eye out for the invisible people on the outskirts that may be looking for a deeper sense of belonging?